Craig, for people who don't know anything about this film, what is it about?
This is a look at police issues in America, more specifically the flow of military technology that has gone into police work. I guess our focus would be more the post 9/11 flow of funding that has gone into domestic police work for equipment. The figure that we cite in the film is $39 billion essentially post 9/11. $34 billion of that was through Department of Homeland Security, obviously established after 9/11, and the other remaining $5 billion was through the Department of Defense. And so we've been looking at that flow of equipment, how it's being integrated into police work, and what that has caused to change in police work now that that equipment has been introduced.
Why did you decide on this topic as a film?
Well, I was originally interested in this topic. My father was a police officer for 29 years, and he was a SWAT officer for 13 of those years. This is outside of Detroit. And I hadn't really thought about police issues or anything to do with SWAT until I saw the aftermath of the Boston Marathon bombing in April of 2013. And it was the first time that I had seen the level of equipment, the level of weaponry. But more specifically, I thought I was observing a shift in the mentality of the officers, which seemed as though it was more of an occupying force versus there to protect and serve. And what I mean by that is I spoke to citizens that experienced that exchange and said, yes, officers were entering our homes without warrants. We asked them not to. Some individual I spoke to said we got pulled out of our house, handcuffed face down in the grass, never told why we were being detained, no charges subsequently filed. And just observing that approach to the community, I thought that it was vastly different than what I remember my dad's era of policing to be. By no means was that a perfect era whatsoever. It just seemed as though something had shifted, and I was curious to know what had shifted, and that was the initial motivation. That was about a year prior to the events in Ferguson, and clearly once the events in Ferguson happened, it became a national topic, but we were more in production a year prior with this original motivation. Early on when we started discussing this topic, people weren't that receptive to it. They thought maybe I was thinking more of like on a conspiratorial level. They thought that, when I would bring up this topic. And so I knew that it was going to be very ineffective if I used talking heads or experts to push a narrative. And I said, the only way that people are going to gain anything from this experience is if I am able to put the camera in these situations where viewers have the opportunity to see for themselves. And so that was the motivation the entire time. And then we spanned out over the country so that we didn't do something that was regionally specific, because police work is different in all parts of the country, and we wanted to look at something that reflected what was happening in America as a whole with police work. And so that was our original motivation. But the whole idea was, let's put the camera in these situations so that the viewer has an opportunity to experience it organically, and rather than, say, in the style of a TV show like Cops, where they're glorifying the police and condemning the accused with simply a pixelated face. I wanted to shoot it more neutrally and not, glorify the officers, but certainly not condemn the accused, and just see what it looked like, from a neutral position while putting the camera there. And I think that's what people have responded to so far.
And a brave cameraman makes a braver film, right? because there were parts in there where you were like pretty much in the faces of the cops, and they didn't mind so much, which leads me to the question of access. When you told these guys at SWAT teams and the city council meetings and places like that, what was their initial reaction, and how did that change during filming?
Well, say like the scenes in Ferguson, the opening scene, we didn't really have access, but everything was taking place out in the public and open, so we were just putting ourselves as close as we could to the action. But when I would approach a police department, I just approached honestly and explained to them what I was trying to do. And I said, listen, I can give you an authentic portrayal of whatever we do together. I'm not going to sensationalize the edit. I'm not going to take things out of context. I'm going to feed it back to you exactly the way that you give it to me. And we did come through on that promise without question. I think that when you're doing something on such a routine basis, such as the frequency of these search warrants, well, to the viewer on the outside, it might seem incredible, but to an officer that's doing that on a daily basis, it's just part of their daily routine. So, while to the outside viewer, it seems like I have tremendous exclusive access, but this is happening on a day-to-day basis, and I think it speaks to the frequency of how often this type of thing is happening, and the fact that we were able to join because it's such a part of the routine experience of a SWAT officer. And it's not unprecedented for film crews to do ride-alongs with police departments. I mean, the TV show Cops was filming with the same St. Louis or South Carolina team that we went out with. So, you know, I think that we were perceived as just another news crew going along with a day in the life, but I think that's pretty revealing when you see what they're doing on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, it's not a negative portrayal of the cops and people doing their job.
Sure.
It's just a scary topic. At any point, was there pushback from the cities or from people you were filming?
In terms of what, like our
your access to
well,
them?
you know, you could almost say that almost every single scene in the film almost didn't happen, just because, you know, we would negotiate access with teams that we thought, you know, could help us tell the full range of the story, because clearly there's times where you would need this equipment. Look no further than the Pulse nightclub shooting. They used one of these armored vehicles, punctured a hole inside the nightclub, and released, you know, the hostages. It's a fantastic use of SWAT. We kept thinking we'd be able to put ourselves in position to show that full range of the experience. We don't end up doing that in the film. What we show is actually the most common use of SWAT, which is, I still think, very important to show, because that's obviously the area that we need the most reform. But when we're, you know, after getting access, there would be some times where there would be another police killing. For example, the Walter Scott situation, where he just got murdered after running away from an officer after a traffic incident. You know, that you know, destroyed our access throughout the country, because the police departments got nervous, like, why would it benefit us for you to ride along with us? Which was unfortunate, because we met some great teams, and I think that could help show a more balanced approach of where this stuff could actually be used in an effective way. But unfortunately, that access would dry up on a regular basis. So it was you know, from a filmmaking perspective, it was a very challenging piece to continue to get the camera in those scenes that, you know, we wanted to show in a more observational way. Well, we had to get the camera there, and that was definitely problematic.
But for like most average citizens who are not criminals, who are not thinking of bombing any places and stuff, isn't this really crazy? Like to put military cars, like you know, vehicles like this on the street, and without real proper training.
Well, that's the whole thing too. You know, one could make the argument that yes, you want your law enforcement officials to be absolutely protected in these situations. And I'm not necessarily against the equipment. I think the MRAPs are excessive across the board because of the way that they're so big, and they collapse bridges and they roll over all the time. But something like the Bearcat, you know, could be an effective tool for police in the right scenarios. And I just think that it's, you know, unfortunate that we keep hearing that this equipment is going to be used for the right, you know, the terrorist event, the active shooter, and then it's turned around to raid homes, and these homes are often for drug offenses, and oftentimes it's for low-level drug offenses. And you know, when we're in South Carolina, they say, you know, they found 1.5 grams of weed and arrested someone and took his, you know, money through asset forfeiture. And at the end of it, they say, oh, it's 50-50. We find stuff 50% of the time. So you're not using those tools for, you know, the rare circumstances. When we're going through training sessions with these officers, they're saying it's only going to be used for these terrorist events, and that's why we're doing it. But while we're waiting for the next 9/11, you know, they're using it for these other routine, you know, search warrants. And so there's just been a complete mission creep. And so I think that we need to, you know, de-incentivize you know, the whole reason for entering in these homes, which largely is due to a financial incentive, because you're able to seize those assets and directly benefit from them to your department. So when you've given the tools of war to an entity and then financially incentivize them to use them, which brings money right back to the department, well, you've certainly created the perfect storm there.
Now, this is a question I know everybody asks you. Your dad, being a veteran in SWAT, and serving, what, 29, 30 years, what does he think of all this?
Sure. Well, you know, I sat him down and showed him the film, and I'd have to say he was fairly devastated by the film. He's not a critic, he likes what I do as a filmmaker, but to see a profession that he dedicated himself, you know, utterly and completely to, evolve into something that he would never want to be a part of, it was fairly disheartening for him. You know, he did 29 search warrants in the 13 years he was on SWAT, total, 29 total. And you contrast that with teams that we're going out with while making the film of a similar size department. They're doing 200 a year, you know, 3 to 4 times a day. So in his era, again, which was not perfect, you know, this is the war on drugs era, there was plenty of egregious mistakes, but it took a long time to get a search warrant, and there was more investigative work that would go into getting the search warrant, so when you ran into the house, you knew what you were actually going to get. Whereas now, there isn't that background investigation and good police work. It's just they're running in these houses on an ongoing and frequent basis. So to see the mission creep and to see how SWAT isn't being reserved for the most dangerous, most violent criminals, but are used as a part of a routine policing approach, that was a disheartening fact to him, because SWAT in his era was never supposed to be something that you would have regularly deployed in the community for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is it totally puts you at odds with your community and makes it seem as though you're an occupying force.
But argument can be made that the criminal has changed, evolved, or changed. Does he believe in that, or I don't want to, I don't know his opinion, but can that argument be made that the type of criminal has changed nowadays?
Sure. Well, and ever more reason to make sure that you're using those tools to fight that criminal. For example, there's the sneak and peek provision of the Patriot Act, which allows law enforcement to enter your home without even you being there or notifying you, search amongst your things, and then tell you after the fact. So it's incredibly invasive. The only reason why that was added to the Patriot Act was for counterterrorism. But when you look at the statistics, in 2013, the Electronic Frontier Foundation did an analysis of all of the warrants that were issued under the sneak and peek provision to fight terrorism. There was 11,000 warrants issued. 51 were for counterterrorism, over 9,000 for drug cases. So here we are again, after all of these bombings and situations, everyone says we need more surveillance technology, but when you're actually looking how it's being deployed, it's not actually to fight terrorism, which was the intended use. Overwhelmingly, it's for these drug cases. So maybe we're not finding these individuals, although we have the largest surveillance network that the world has ever seen, because we're not using it for that. We're using it actually for other things that the American people never really signed up for or would have never signed off on. The Patriot, that was for terrorism. Now they're using it for counter drugs. So if the criminal has adapted, sure, let's use those new tools to find that adapting criminal.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You've shown this to festivals, audiences have been reacting to it. What has the audience reactions been where you were present?
People have overwhelmingly been shocked to see. I think that this film gives you a visual example of many of the headlines that you've been hearing since Furgesoun, but it does so in a way where it respects the audience and allows them to think and to process the information, because it's much more of an observational style. So, I can say that audiences have been very shocked, but I was shocked when I was filming it. I'm very desensitized to the material now, but when I see people come out after sitting there for 72 minutes, they have a tremendous amount of questions of how we actually, devolved into the place that we're actually at. And people are eager to know what they can do about it, So we always try to point them to, things that you can do from, like a local level. New Hampshire, and the people that have been fighting their state government there, they were able to pass a law that requires the criminal conviction of someone before you can seize their assets. Massive step forward, California just voted on it last week and passed it. These are things that I think that you start to de-incentivize police going into the community and raising money. Well, guess what? There's going to be less police-citizen interactions, which could then lead to violent exchanges or people being arrested or killed unnecessarily. So if we're reducing the number of times that police are engaging with the community, then you're going to see less deaths happening, clearly. And I just don't think that, one, we should be treating citizens like ATMs, and two, you shouldn't be putting police officers, many of which sign up to protect and serve, and making them be the tax collectors for the community. You should, relieve them of that duty, so you're not putting them at odds with their community, and they can actually get back to the style of police work that all the communities are asking of their police officers, which is to be a part of the community and to tailor that policing practice to the needs of those communities. Well, I really hope that this film becomes a teaching tool in law enforcement more than anything. For communities that have experienced this for decades, we're not really saying anything new, although I do think that we're providing an example that people, that have been fighting these issues in those communities have said to us, we have a visual account now of some of the things that we've been saying for decades, and they appreciate that. And there's plenty of people within law enforcement that are trying to change the culture, are trying to change the style of practice, but they also are being met with a tremendous amount of resistance, because it's very hard to be a whistleblower in police work and there's a pack mentality, and it's very difficult to make changes. So I'm hoping that the film serves as an example for both the community and officers who are trying to reform their departments, and saying, hey, this is actually something that we can look at and see that these are specific areas of reform that are actionable. We had the opportunity to screen at the Criminal Justice College, the John Jay Criminal Justice School, which is basically the NYPD feeder school. And there was 300 people there, and many active duty NYPD, some of which got up after the screening and said, thank you so much for making the film. This reflects reality, and we can absolutely look to this as a teaching tool for areas that we need to reform. So off the strength of that, I'm hoping to continue to bring it to law enforcement, to police academies, and just bring up the discussion of how we're being trained. Are we still, using best policies with, bringing new officers and integrate them into environments that they maybe never had experience with? And so I think, we're really trying to push that and bring it to law enforcement, because that's obviously the population that has the most ability to control and to change it. So, I hope we continue on that trend as well.